Hello, everyone. The standard stunned look when I come on Facebook, on my Facebook page. Good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday night at 7 p.m., and that means it is another edition of the MYBC Virtual Bookstore Author Series. And I am so blessed to know so many creative beings in my life. And I truly believe we are the steward of each other's creativity. And when you read something and it had an impactful moment in your life, or lately I've been seeing on Facebook people going, what self-help book are you reading these days, or what book changed your life? And books have such power because it's the person's brain and creativity down onto words. You read the words and then you be able to create the story yourself. So without further ado, this particular person, Miss Charmaine Hammond, is, I think, my first multiple, and by multiple, lots of multiples, book author. So welcome, Charmaine, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here. I love talking all things books, so I'm excited for the conversation.
Absolutely. So a little bit of your her story would be great, and then how you took your her story and turned it into some books.
Well, where do I begin? I'm going to begin with working in the correctional system many years ago, my first career. And part of what helped me cope with stress in those days was actually writing. So I used to write a lot of poetry, never did anything with it, but just wrote poetry as sort of like journaling, but in poetry form. And then fast forward many years, my husband and I adopted a dog named Toby. And man, did he have issues. He cost us so much money. He was a house-wrecking, destructive dog that we adopted, but we were deeply in love with him. And so I wrote a story about him called Volunteering from the Heart. And I thought there was a call out on Chicken Soup for the Soul, a book that lots of you know, and they had a call out for authors. And I thought, what do I know about writing a book? But I'm just going to try it. It's a short chapter. And I wrote my first chapter and they accepted it. They said yes. And I got published in Chicken Soup for the Soul. And it was that story about my dog, Toby, who he taught me to be a better person. He taught me about the importance of play. He taught me not to be a perfectionist. Mind you, I still am to some degree, but much better. And that's when the author journey began, honestly. And then that Chicken Soup led into On Toby's Terms, which was the first book I wrote about myself, or wrote by myself. It wasn't a collaborative book. And then I knew the book of the sort of the bug of writing had caught me.
I just want to stop you for a second because I'm very familiar with the Chicken Soup for the Soul book.
Yeah.
I actually have one that I know you were an author in. And I found that by accident as I was reading through. I just want to vote in the comments. And by the way, if you have any questions for Charmaine, please throw it in the comments. She'll come and take a look at them later. No one's moderating or watching the comments. But my question is have you ever been able to get through a Chicken Soup for the Soul book without crying at least once?
Oh, no.
That's mine.
I know, they're so emotional. What I love about those, that's what I love about collaborative books, whether it's Chicken Soup for the Soul or like Voices of the 21st Century that I was just in. What I love is that there's many different stories, and it's sort of like Chicken Soup, you can pick it up and read one, and then generally it makes me cry, or some of them just make me laugh. Like, the stories are just from people around the world. And yeah, I agree though. That's really, I've never gotten through one without crying.
Oh, no. And I love it because it's interesting when you think of the analogy, and good on, I think it was Canfield started it,
Jack
right?
Canfield,
Jack Canfield. That whole analogy, because I think as we get older, we tend to teach in analogies, is you can just envision that warm bowl of soup nourishing your soul in little bits. You never have a big pot of soup to make yourself feel better. You
Yeah.
just have a little bowl of
bit.
soup made by your Nona or by, by someone who cares and
Mhm.
serving it up. So
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So you've been in two.
Two. Well, you know what was interesting? And so some of the folks listening to this, if they've been involved with Chicken Soup for the Soul, something interesting happened. So that first Chicken Soup for the Soul story was 2009. So we're going back a few years. Then about 3 years ago, I think it was, I get this email from Chicken Soup for the Soul, and they said, we're republishing your story in this version of Chicken Soup for the Soul. And so that was really cool. Volunteering from the Heart, that was in 2009, got republished in that Canadian book, which was like an unintended surprise. I hadn't planned that. I hadn't been in touch with them for a long time. So the little tip for authors is that often your stories, in books like Chicken Soup for the Soul might get picked up again.
That's where I found you. I think when I was picking up the acts of kindness, because as you were a guest speaker last year on the Gratitude and Appreciation Summit, that's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I can remember picking up the book and then flipping through it. And I think I sent you a screenshot, went, oh my gosh, you're in this book. You're amazing. I know this lady. And I know her story. And it was just, and of course I bought the book. It sits on my coveted books. So continue on with your author journey.
So then after On Toby's Terms, I had the opportunity to write a book with a dear friend, Deborah Kozowski, and we wrote GPS Your Best Life. So this was not about a dog. It was a collaborative book that Deborah and I wrote together, and it's about finding your best life. And we had so much fun. Like, I was thinking about this the other day, that Deborah and I would be on the phone, late at night, co-authoring this book. And Deborah is a very creative visual thinker. Like, one of the things I loved about working with her is that she was creating these analogies of, if you think about life, going on a journey. So we'd have, a chapter like getting rid of the junk in the trunk and making sure that you're driving with a clean windshield. But these were all analogies for things that we do in life. And Deborah just would come up with them so fast. So that was a really cool way to write a book with someone else. And then the tricky part when you do that is then how do you take two voices and make them sound congruent? So the other piece that I loved about that writing journey was I learned so much. It was very different writing, my own book and then writing a book with another partner. And Deborah had, when she wrote GPS Your Best Life, when we did that together, she went on to do several other books as well. So I don't know, it seems to be the writing bug bites people and they continue on. And then I wrote shortly thereafter, I self-published, or actually before that, I self-published a book called Bounce Forward, which never went on Amazon. It was just for my corporate clients. It was to give my corporate clients after a speaking engagement. And
so it's almost like Diane Rolston was on last week.
Yeah.
And she was talking about her book and using it like the ultimate business card.
Yes.
That was just brilliant.
Well, and the fun part was Diane and I both belong to the same speaking organization, Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. So the reason that this book came to be, honestly, was I won a prize at a CAPS convention. I won from Friesen's Press 1,000 books being printed. And so I thought, I could whip that up in no time. That was what I thought. And then the deadline was creeping closer. And Friesen's would call, are you ever going to write that book? Like, you've got 1,000 copies. And so I wrote that book, and that was incredible. It was my first time self-publishing. So again, another big learning curve. And then 2 kids' books, and then featured in a number of other collaborative books.
So if we can, there's a couple of things I want to unpack, as I like to say, from the first story. If we can go back to the GPS book, if you want to share maybe a couple of the table of contents in there, or the back of the book, or something in there that's a little bit of a teaser on why that book is going to help somebody.
Okay. I love what we put on the back of the book. So
Yeah.
it says obstacles, roadblocks, and life's inevitable pitfalls can detour and derail us on our journey to achieving our goals, wasting precious time, or even preventing us from getting there at all. This book is a navigation tool to help you sort through your many choices and guide you more directly to your destination. GPS Your Best Life will help you chart and traverse the many options that lay ahead of you and steer you to greater fulfillment, achievement, and success in style.
So is it kind of a workbook style? Or
Yeah, it is. We did something really interesting. Is at the end of the at the end of each chapter, we have what we call the road rules to live by. So I just opened up to page 117. My finger went there, and so there's three at the end of every chapter. We have road rules to live by. So on this particular chapter, we had stay on track with a daily review of accomplishments and areas that need improvement. Ask for feedback to deal with your blind spots, and commit to lifelong driver's education, meaning what you and I were talking about before we came online, which is that driving. And then we also have a little mapping your way exercise, which is how has your intuition served you, and what do you do to keep your batteries recharged, so to stay resilient. And then in reviewing your mileage log, which was sort of tracking all your daily goals, where have you lost some of your valuable time, and how can you better plan your mileage for the day? So we had a lot of fun creating these. Those two pieces occur at the end of every chapter. And then we also did exercises throughout. So it really is, when you use the word, is it like a workbook? It actually really is. It very much is like a workbook.
Okay, so fast forward, you've got a couple of recently published books.
Yes,
as well.
I do. So when we were talking earlier about collaborative books, a collaborative book is where a number of authors contribute a short chapter or a story. They all look a little different. So I've been in 3 versions of the Voices for the 21st Century, and they're published by Women's Speaker Association, WSA Publishing. What was really cool about those books is the range of stories of, so there's 40 authors in there, and they all contribute a chapter, their story. And the stories were all over the map, from overcoming adversity to overcoming health issues, to life's challenges, to relationship, to inspiration. So those books really have what I call something for everyone.
Well, I love that. I think the world, no, I'm trying to quit saying that word. I know the world, this is how the evolution that we're going to change the world or continue to grow in a much more holistic. I love that word collaboration. And I was lucky enough to be in your seminar, the collaboration effect, and a number of different things that we're attempting to collaborate on. And it just makes the journey so much easier, and honoring the people that are with you and how their story helps your story. I do this W5 process with people. To me, if you can get your story straight before you can get onto social media, no one can call BS on you, kind of thing. Just walk your truth. And it's just amazing when I say to people, it's your why, it's your truth, and when you collaborate and use your story and plug it into other people's story, you're seen as someone who builds relationship. And the last words that I use in my training for that is, we were all born with a blank set of encyclopedias, and there's no greater gift than being a story in somebody else's. Beautiful. And I just, how do you continue to want to keep writing, and where's your next inspiration? That's one. And then I've got a really cool question that just came to my head for the next question.
Okay. Well, the one I've just self-published another a desktop guide, and I can't even believe I don't have it right beside me. But I wanted to have a book that I guess would be like a quick reference guide when I'm speaking to audiences corporately around resilience, communication, conflict resolution. Those are the topics I speak on in workplaces. And what I found is that a lot of times when I'm speaking, people will say things like, can you say that again so I can write it down? Like they're looking for a script, or what does that communication skill actually look like in real life? Like, how would it sound? How would I say it? So I decided to write a little quick reference guide called Working Better Together. And it's a short book that takes some of the key points of what I speak about. And then that book will be turned into a much larger book, a more comprehensive book, which is Working Better Together, Leading Teams Through Resilience, Change, and Conflict. And that's a much bigger book that has a lot of additional chapters that the guidebook doesn't have. And one of the things that I've really learned with writing is that you can repurpose things. So for example, this little book now, I started with the big book, and then I pulled out chapters that I thought were really relevant. And I created that mini book, that desktop guide for a speaking engagement that I was doing. So you can take pieces of a book to create other resources or guides or mini books. And then, another cool thing that I've seen authors do is they'll take blogs, and I actually did this. That's how I wrote Bounce Forward, was I took a series of blogs and articles that I had written, because I honestly just didn't know where to get started. I was kind of spinning my wheels, and the writing was not very structured. And once I started taking things like my blogs and articles, it gave me a foundation to start from. And then, of course, there was a lot of editing from moving an article and blog into a book format, but it gave me a place to start from. And I hear from a lot of writers, sometimes it's the getting started part right. that's difficult for people. And once they get started, it seems to flow. But what really worked for me was talking my book. I learned through that process. I learned that I am a much better storyteller verbally than in writing. And so what I did was I got on, there's a software program, Dragonspeak. It's a voice recognition software. So I would just get on and I would talk my book. I'd walk around my office, talking about conflict resolution and a story about resilience. And then my computer would just type it all. And then, of course, there's a lot of editing and all the ums and the ahs that have to come out. But what happened is when I compared what I had written from my head into my computer versus what I'd written from my mouth into the computer, what came out of my mouth into the computer was so much richer, so much more interesting to read. And when I was writing from my head into the computer, it was much more technical. And so the writing style was different. So my publisher said, you know what, Charmaine, you need to write books by talking your book. That's your way. So I did.
And you know what? And because I know you both, really, this is a connection, an author I've met in person a couple of times. I can see how your authenticity would be received in a book that you talked out, versus that kind of out of your head. So that's interesting. I'm in the process of writing a book right now. I've got one that is going to be pulled together quite quickly. It's going to be a little online, like an ebook that somebody can download. And then I've got another one that I'm working on, because I have journals all over my house. So if I have to walk farther than about 5 steps to pick up a journal to start writing in, the thought's lost. So I like that idea about voice, using that voice, and either dictating it on Dragonspeak or finding that. So my question is where do you draw inspiration when Charmaine wants to tuck in with a nice little cup of tea or a nice little glass of wine, and draw from either, let's call it fiction, because we got to give props to some fiction people, because there are some fiction books listed on my the MYBC site. And where do you draw inspiration for nonfiction when you want to kind of tuck into some books?
So when I'm writing, I draw inspiration mostly from life. So from people I know, things I do, places I go. Interestingly enough, music inspires me. I was listening to on YouTube a couple of weeks ago to Phil Collins, doing one of my favorite performers, Phil Collins in Genesis. And I was sitting there and thinking, and what came out of my mind was, I need to write a blog. I mean, I was actually just listening to music, doing other work, but so I discovered that music actually inspires a level of creativity in me, and it actually gets me excited about writing. It doesn't feel like work. And then when I'm reading books, like, because I also love to read, and I don't take as much time to read as I should take, and I mean should in a good way, but it's a real passion for mine, and I need to remember to take time to read more. I read a lot of business books and a lot of entrepreneurial books, but just pure books that give me joy, like Bridges of Madison County, for example. Like, and sometimes the inspiration on what I read comes from watching something on TV, whether it's watching an author be interviewed or watching the movie that resulted from a book. And but I and also, for me, inspiration, it just comes from life, mostly for me, what's going on in life.
Oh, that's awesome. So how's Toby? Is Toby still the dog extraordinaire in your life?
You know, he is Toby. Toby is, well, we don't know exactly how old he is. We think he's close to 10, but he is an inspiration. He's completely different from the Toby that I wrote the first book about, On Toby's Terms. This dog is all about love, play with me, let's just hang out and have some fun. Which is problematic when you're trying to work. But he really is about play and just taking time in life. And he's been a great resource for me in terms of making sure that I take time for me, taking time to get outside, take time to exercise. I should actually say I get writing bugs when I'm walking Toby.
Oh,
So I get a lot of fun. So I'll have to stop and kind of voicemail myself with the idea, or I'll message myself through email with an idea. So I think for writers, pay attention to the great question you asked, where does your inspiration come from? Because when you know that, writing can feel less difficult, because a lot of times it just feels like hard work for me if I'm not in the mood or feeling creative.
and you just gave a couple of little tips there. I would not have thought to voicemail myself or thinking, when you think about writing a book, I almost get, well, I got to sit and I got to do this and this and this, and
Yeah.
that the little tools out there that I use, because I do
Mm-hmm.
social media, and I just think of all the different tools that I pick up and build stuff for my clients.
Yeah.
But the tools that are available, as in a quick voice note, take that voice note, it creates
Mm-hmm.
a little file and over it goes. Because when you're in the moment, when you don't have a piece of paper, you can't let that go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
brilliant little tip out there, guys, that you're watching about writing a book. That's amazing.
And then you can do this. If you don't have your cell phone, you don't have a piece of paper, you don't have a way to message yourself, you just keep saying it over and over again in your head. So that when you get home, you don't say, what was that I was thinking again? Yeah.
Oh, that's definitely brilliant. So as we wrap this up, any last words of wisdom to would-be authors out there, would-be people that want to dive in maybe to a self-help book or business book out there? What's your last little thoughts about being an author?
I would say to take time, to map out time to write, because when we don't, but we've placed it a priority, it will start to feel like work if we don't allow it the time that it needs. And the other piece would be to determine, the question you asked was so great when you said, where does your inspiration come from? When you know where your inspiration comes from, and then the best way you write, are you a better talker or a better writer from your head? When you can figure out the way that works for you to write. I have a friend who says, I do my best work laying down, and she handwrites everything. She doesn't use the computer. I'm like, how do you handwrite laying down on your back? But she's figured out a way to do that. But if she sits at the computer, she doesn't have the same thought process. So that would be my advice, is to make time for it and figure out what works for you in terms of writing.
That's great. I was talking to someone today about that word procrastination. And I said, procrastination is the absence of desire. So when we get back to, or change our scenery, Just like as you go for a walk with Toby, you
Mhm.
change your scenery, that feeling of desire comes back because you're in a desirable moment with your dog to be able to come and mirror that back to when we're writing. So I just love that. It's the absence of desire. And when you want a desire to share the world, your her story and your dog story and your collaborative story, then it's there for you. And
Mm.
I just want to say thank you so much for being a good friend. I want to say thank you for all you do with community and nonprofits, because you are a
Thank you.
champion for nonprofits to make sure that their messages get out. I'm almost going to tear
Yeah.
up. I do know more than Charmaine's her story and her private life, and just how much she gives back to make sure that other people's stories get out there and they get the support that they need in order to change the world.
Aw,
So
thank you.
you're
Thank
a
you.
wonderful lady, Charmaine. And I know one of your books or a couple of your books are up on my website, but if you want to send me some of your other copy or URLs, we'll make sure it gets up on my website. Oh my
Thank
gosh,
you.
guys.
Oh, thank you
I
so
just love
much.
books. I love books, I love people, and I love creativity. So I'm in a perfect place in front of a beautiful friend. So
Well,
thank you so much,
thank
guys, for
you.
tuning in. As I wipe my tears away so I can go read a book later, is I have authors booked until the end of July. Every Tuesday night at 7:00, I share with you whether I've met the person, I haven't met the person, they were connected to me through other people, because they know what fuels my desire. So I'll never have procrastination sharing these incredible author stories with you. So enjoy the night, everybody, and we'll see you
Thank you.
next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Bye-bye, everybody.
Oh.